Picture this. You're sitting in a conference room. Everyone's nodding along. The presentation slides keep rolling. Charts, statistics, official statements. Around you, people scribble notes, maintain professional smiles, stay perfectly aligned with the narrative being presented. Then someone raises their hand. The voice is calm, measured, but the question cuts like a scalpel. It's not rude, not confrontational, just honest, brutally, uncomfortably honest. And suddenly, everything stops. The presenter freezes mid-sentence. Eyes dart nervously across the room. Someone clears their throat. Another shifts uncomfortably in their seat. But no one answers. Not because the question is stupid, but because it's too smart. You've just witnessed the oldest threat to any power structure. The emergence of someone who thinks for themselves. Someone with critical thinking. Because let's be real, the system doesn't fear you because you lack credentials. It fears you because you don't need its validation. You're not limited by the same gatekeepers, not molded by the same institutions, not trained to think within acceptable boundaries. You move differently. You ask questions that no curriculum would dare include. You think with a freedom that can't be bought, can't be bribed, can't be intimidated. And that terrifies those who built their power on comfortable conformity. Socrates understood this over 2,000 years ago. The philosopher they executed for teaching young people to think. The founder of a method that still makes power structures nervous today. He grasped something fundamental about the nature of control. The real danger to authority isn't strength, isn't weapons, isn't rebellion. It's questions, the ability to see contradictions, to recognize manipulation, to distinguish truth from its imitation. And whoever masters this becomes ungovernable. And ungovernable equals dangerous. Critical thinking has never been a neutral skill. It's always been a weapon, not violent, but intellectual. A weapon that doesn't destroy buildings, but illusions, not bodies, but dogmas. That's precisely why no authoritarian structure has ever encouraged it. Instead, they've hidden it behind the facade of education, replaced it with memorization, substituted it with obedience. In his dialogues, Socrates demonstrated something simple. Most people don't think independently. They repeat learned thoughts, reproduce patterns, mimic authorities. And when someone starts asking simple questions, when they request explanations for basic things, the entire construction collapses. Because it turns out nobody actually understands why things are arranged this way. People are just used to it. And power relies on this. Not on the strength of arguments, but on the strength of habit. Not on logic, but on automatism. When you see this, when you understand the mechanics, you can't play the game the same way anymore. Drop the illusions. In every stable society, knowledge is never distributed randomly. It's filtered, measured, delivered through strictly controlled channels. Schools, universities, media, expert boards. They tell us this maintains standards. But Socrates would laugh at such naivety, because whoever controls knowledge controls reality, not physical reality, but the one inside people's heads. And that's the most powerful kind of control. Think about it. From childhood, you're trained not to think, but to answer, not to ask why, but to memorize how. You're conditioned to reproduce information, not analyze it. Rewarded for correct answers, not for correct questions. And gradually, you adapt. You get used to receiving ready-made conclusions, used to trusting authorities, used to not checking sources, not looking for contradictions, not doubting the obvious. And when someone breaks free from this, when someone starts thinking differently, the system reacts instantly. It doesn't physically harm you. It does something far more sophisticated. It isolates you, labels you as problematic, as someone who can't work in teams, as difficult, as inconvenient. And the scariest part is, this often works not through force, but through peer pressure. Your environment itself starts pressuring those who stand out, because they disturb the peace, because they force others to think about things they'd rather ignore. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is the mechanics of social control that's worked for centuries. You can be educated and remain compliant. You can know many facts and understand no processes. You can have diplomas and lack critical thinking skills. That's exactly what the system counts on. It doesn't want you stupid. It needs you functional but predictable, competent but obedient, educated but not autonomous. But there are people who've decoded this script, not because they're geniuses, but because they couldn't turn off their attention. Their minds work differently. They don't accept information on faith. They verify, dissect, look for gaps, and such people are immediately noticeable. They ask questions where everyone else just nods. They see contradictions where others see stability. They can't simply agree when something doesn't make sense, and this makes them dangerous, not aggressive, but uncontrollable. Critical thinking doesn't teach you to hate the system. It teaches you to see it as it actually is, without embellishment, without propaganda, without filters. And when you see reality without makeup, you can no longer perceive the performance as truth, can no longer believe what they're selling you as obvious, can no longer stay silent when you witness absurdity. Socrates called this awakening, leaving the cave where people see only shadows on the wall and mistake them for reality, and the one who left, who saw real light, can never return and pretend not to know the truth. They might stay silent out of caution, but internally they're changed forever. And the system senses this. It doesn't read minds, but it sees behavior, sees that someone doesn't respond to manipulation as expected, that they don't fall for emotional pressure, that they place logic above groupthink, and that's an alarm signal, because such people won't follow the crowd off a cliff, won't support absurd decisions for the sake of maintaining hierarchy, won't stay silent for career advancement. They will speak, not necessarily loudly, but clearly, and that's enough to shatter the illusion of unanimity on which the entire construction rested. Here's where the real game begins, because the system doesn't attack openly. It doesn't forbid you from thinking. It does something craftier. It discredits your thinking, smears your reputation, isolates you socially. It whispers that you're too complicated, that you don't understand simple things, that you don't fit well into the collective, that you have communication problems. And the scariest part is, this often works, because people don't want to be outcasts. They want to belong, to feel part of a community. And when the group tells you that your honesty is a problem, your criticality is a flaw, your independence is weirdness, many break, start adapting, muting their voice, pretending not to notice the obvious. Socrates took a different path. He didn't abandon his questions even when facing death. They offered him exile, silence, changing his approach. He refused, not from pride, but from principle, because he understood something simple. If you renounce critical thinking for survival, you stop being yourself. You become a function of the system, a tool. But this isn't a heroic story. It's a tragedy, because most people aren't ready to pay this price. They choose safety over truth, comfort over honesty, belonging over autonomy, and that's normal. That's human. But you need to understand it's a choice, conscious or unconscious, but a choice. And if you make it, you can't later say the system forced you. The system simply proposed a deal. You accepted its terms. But there are those who don't accept, who can't accept, for whom truth matters more than recognition. Understanding matters more than approval. Freedom of thought matters more than social status. And these people pay for it, not always with their lives, like Socrates, but with loneliness, misunderstanding, the constant feeling of being out of place among those who long ago stopped asking. But the scariest thing for the system isn't that you think differently. The scariest thing is that you don't need its approval, that your confidence doesn't depend on external validation, that you are your own authority, not in the sense of arrogance, but in the sense of autonomy. You verify information yourself, draw conclusions yourself, make decisions yourself, and nobody can convince you of something absurd just because everyone says so. This independence destroys the foundation of any power, because power relies on dependency, on people's need for approval, protection, recognition, on their fear of being rejected, on their belief that without the system they're worthless. But the critically thinking person knows this is a lie. They've seen how the mechanism works. They understand that most authorities are just skillfully playing a role, that many experts repeat what they've memorized, that numerous leaders simply adapted well. And when you understand this, authority stops being something sacred. It becomes what it always was, a social agreement, which can be accepted or rejected. Think about it. How many times have you agreed with an opinion because an expert expressed it? How many times accepted a rule because that's how it's done? How many times didn't ask questions because you were afraid of looking unintelligent? This isn't weakness. This is normal human reaction. We're social beings. We care what others think of us. But critical thinking teaches you to distinguish healthy sociability from toxic dependency. It doesn't make you a loner. It makes you free in choosing who to be with. And this freedom is unbearable for the system, because when enough people stop needing its approval, it loses influence, not power through coercion, but power through persuasion. And that's the only power that actually works in the modern world. But nobody tells you the truth about what happens next. When you learn to think critically, you don't become happier, at least not immediately. First, you become lonelier, because most conversations become empty. Most topics stop interesting you. Most people seem to you like they're playing roles, and you're not being superior. You simply see what you didn't notice before. You see how people repeat learned phrases, how they defend positions they don't believe in themselves, how they play a game whose rules they don't understand. And this doesn't make you better than them. It makes you different. And this feeling of difference is heavy. You're invited less, shared with less, looked at with caution, not because you're bad, but because you're unpredictable, because around you people have to be more honest. And honesty is exhausting. Socrates knew this price. He wrote that wisdom brings pain, that ignorance is sometimes happier than understanding, that simplicity is safer than depth. But he also said that an unexamined life is not worth living. And there's the whole paradox. Critical thinking makes life more complicated, but more meaningful. Lonelier but more honest. Harder but freer. You can no longer just go with the flow. Can no longer justify your inaction by saying everyone does it. Can no longer hide behind authority figures. Now you yourself are responsible for your thoughts, for your choices, for your life. And that's a burden, a real burden. But it's also freedom. Freedom from others' expectations, from imposed values, from false goals. And if you're ready to pay the price, if loneliness doesn't scare you more than lies, if understanding matters more than comfort, then critical thinking becomes not a curse, but a gift. The gift of seeing the world as it is, not better, not worse, just real. So let's draw the line. Critical thinkers aren't hated for being smarter, they're feared for being freer. And freedom of thought has always been the greatest threat to control. Socrates understood this perfectly. The system is held not by force, but by belief. Belief that without it you're nothing, that without its permission you have no right, that without its approval you're not worth attention. But critical thinking shatters this belief. It proves that understanding doesn't require a certificate, that truth doesn't depend on position, that reality isn't decided by vote. And when you realize this, when you truly understand that you can think without permission, analyze without supervision, draw conclusions without a curator, then nobody controls you completely anymore. They can limit actions, but not thoughts, can punish words, but not understanding, can isolate socially, but not intellectually. And that's exactly why critical thinking is so dangerous, not for you. For those accustomed to ruling through manipulation, who built power on ignorance, who keep people dependent through fear of looking unintelligent. These people don't want you to think, they want you to function, execute, consume, vote correctly, buy what's needed, believe what's necessary. And critical thinking destroys this program, not aggressively, simply through questions. Why exactly this way? Who benefits from this? What are the alternatives? What happens if we refuse? And these simple questions can demolish constructions built over decades. That's why they're so feared. That's why they're so rarely taught. That's why critical thinking will always be under suspicion. So if you recognized yourself in these words, if you feel like you ask too many questions, think too deeply, see too clearly, listen carefully to what no system will ever tell you, you're not the problem. You're the beginning of the solution, because every time someone refuses to think by template, the world takes a step toward real freedom. Keep learning, but not to impress someone, not to collect diplomas, not to prove something to the system. Learn to stay free, to stay alert, to stay yourself, because when you know you think without permission, analyze without approval, understand without support, there's no going back, and there doesn't need to be. The world needs you, not the edited version, not the one that fits into others' frames. Exactly you, the one who sees clearly, feels deeply, thinks boldly, speaks carefully, questions everything. Your questions aren't noise. They're the first echoes of a better world, and if society tries to silence you with labels, indifference, or disguised contempt, take it as a sign. The discomfort you create isn't a flaw, it's a clue. It means you're approaching something real. So keep going. Don't apologize for thinking differently. Don't apologize for learning your own way. Don't apologize for not fitting in, because those who today call you to complicated, to analytical, to free, tomorrow will study your ideas. History has always been written by those who dared to think outside the script. And if you ever doubt yourself, if you feel out of place among those blindly following rules, remember this: your independence isn't a flaw, it's your greatest strength, because those who can think without permission are the only ones who can truly change the world. This isn't about opposition for opposition's sake. It's about seeing clearly when everyone pretends not to see, speaking when silence becomes complicity, learning from love of understanding, not from fear of judgment. That's the essence of intellectual freedom. That's the spark that drove every breakthrough, every idea, every rupture with the old order. And this spark lives in you every time you dare to ask, when you refuse to repeat without understanding, when you choose truth even when it's uncomfortable. Don't apologize for thinking differently, because those who today call you to intense, to critical, to free, tomorrow will try to understand how you did it. History has always belonged to those who dared to think without a script. And if that's you, if inside you lives this insatiable hunger to understand, to see deeper, to go further, never suppress it, nurture it, protect it, because this curiosity, this clarity of vision, this courage to think with your own mind is the seed of all true transformation. You weren't born to execute orders, you were born to understand them, weren't born to repeat ideas, were born to discover them, weren't born to serve the system, were born to transcend it. Because the freedom to think independently is the purest form of power that exists, and nobody, absolutely nobody can take it from you as long as you don't allow it yourself.